Have you ever trusted someone so completely that their betrayal feels like it rips the very fabric of your reality? I have. And I'm here to tell you how I stitched it back together, not with forgiveness, but with a revenge so meticulously planned, it would unravel his entire world, lie by devastating lie. This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's a story of reclaiming my power. Our life was a masterpiece. Or so I thought. Mark was the kind of man you read about in novels. He was charming, ambitious, and he looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. We had the perfect house in the suburbs, 2 successful careers, and a love story that was the envy of all our friends. We were that couple, the one that made everyone else believe in soulmates. I remember our 3rd anniversary. He surprised me with a trip to Paris. We stood at the top of the Eiffel Tower, and he whispered in my ear, "You are my everything, Anna, my North Star." I believed him. I held on to those words like a lifeline. They were the foundation of my world. A world I would soon discover was built on a sinkhole of deceit. He was a master of the grand gesture. The extravagant gifts, the surprise weekend getaways, they were all part of the illusion. He painted our life with such vibrant colors that I never thought to look for the cracks in the canvas. He was a brilliant architect, and I was living in the beautiful house he built for me. A gilded cage, and I didn't even know I was trapped. He was a financial advisor, highly respected in his field. He managed our finances, our investments, everything. I trusted him implicitly. Why wouldn't I? He was my partner, my best friend. When he'd come home late, smelling of expensive cologne and exhaustion, he'd tell me about the high-stakes deals he was closing, the mountains he was moving for our future. I'd rub his shoulders and tell him how proud I was. I was proud of the man he pretended to be. But even in the brightest sunshine, shadows can linger. There were small things at first. Things you dismiss, you explain away. A hushed phone call he'd take in another room. A credit card statement that didn't quite add up, which he'd laugh off as a clerical error. He had an answer for everything. And I, so drunk on the love I thought we shared, eagerly drank every last drop of his explanations. I remember one night he was asleep, and his phone buzzed. It was a text from a name I didn't recognize. "Kinda wait for the weekend," it said, with a winking emoji. My heart hammered in my chest. I almost woke him up. But then, I told myself I was being paranoid. It was probably a client, a networking thing. I put the phone down and went back to sleep. A tiny seed of doubt planted in the fertile ground of my heart. I had no idea the forest of lies that was about to grow from that single tiny seed. The truth is, I didn't want to know. Not yet. Because knowing would mean the end of everything. And I wasn't ready to let go of the beautiful lie we were living. The universe has a funny way of nudging you towards the truth, even when you are desperately trying to look the other way. My nudge came in the form of a certified letter. It was addressed to Mark, from a bank we didn't use. I almost left it on his desk, but my curiosity, that little seed of doubt that had been planted weeks ago, was starting to sprout. I told myself it was probably just a credit card offer, but my hands trembled as I held the envelope. It wasn't a credit card offer. It was a foreclosure notice on a property I had never heard of, a luxury condominium downtown, and it was in Mark S.'s name. The blood drained from my face. I felt a wave of nausea. Foreclosure? We were financially secure. Mark was a genius with money. This had to be a mistake. Hey, honey, I got some strange mail for you, a foreclosure notice? For a condo downtown? Oh, I see. A Client S property in your name? Right, for tax purposes. Of course. That makes sense. He had an explanation, of course. He always did. It was for a client, he said. A complicated investment strategy. He put the property in his name to help the client avoid some tax implications. It sounded plausible. Mark was always coming up with creative financial solutions for his clients. But the knot in my stomach didn't go away. Why hadn't he mentioned it? That night, I couldn't sleep. His explanation replayed in my mind, and with each repetition, it sounded flimsier. I slipped out of bed and went to his home office. I had never gone through his things before. It felt like a violation of the trust I so desperately wanted to believe we still had. But the foreclosure notice had unlocked a door in my mind, and I had to see what was behind it. I started with his bank statements. I found the statements for the secret account linked to the condo. And that S when I saw it. The first thread of the lie. There were regular payments to a jewelry store. Expensive ones. And monthly transfers to a name I didn't recognize. A woman's name, Isabella. My heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. Isabella. Who was Isabella? I typed her name into a search engine, along with the city. And there she was. A beautiful young woman. A fitness instructor. Her social media was a curated collection of a life I knew nothing about. Pictures of her on exotic vacations, posing in front of stunning sunsets, wearing a necklace I recognized. A necklace Mark had told me he bought at a charity auction. For his mother. It was all there. In black and white and filtered perfection. The trips he told me were for business conferences. The expensive gifts he claimed were for clients. They were all for her. He wasn't just lying. He was living a completely separate life. A life funded by our money. My money. The initial shock was like a physical blow. I felt winded, like I couldn't breathe. Then came the anger. A white-hot rage that consumed me. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a betrayal of everything we had built together. The trust, the dreams, the future. All of it, a carefully constructed lie. And as I sat there in the darkness of his office, surrounded by the evidence of his deception, a new feeling began to emerge. A cold, calculating resolve. He had underestimated me. He had mistaken my love for weakness. And he was about to find out just how wrong he was. The next few days were a blur of feigned normalcy. I played the part of the loving wife, the dutiful partner. I made him his favorite meals. I asked about his day. I smiled and nodded as he spun his web of lies. But on the inside, I was a woman transformed. The grief was still there, a constant ache in my chest. But it was now overshadowed by a singular, burning purpose, to uncover the full extent of his betrayal. I became a detective in my own home. Every evening, after he fell asleep, I would slip into his office and continue my investigation. The affair with Isabella was just the tip of the iceberg. I discovered a secret life that was far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Mark wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a con artist. He had been running a Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors to pay off earlier ones. Our friends, our neighbors, even my own parents, he had convinced them all to invest with him. He was using their life savings to fund his double life. to buy Isabella S. affection with lavish gifts and exotic trips. The sheer audacity of it all was breathtaking. He had created a house of cards, and our entire life was built on it. He had woven such an intricate web of lies that it was almost a work of art, a dark, twisted masterpiece of deception. And as I delved deeper, I realized that his betrayal wasn't just personal. It was criminal. I knew I couldn't expose him on my own. I needed help. I hired a private investigator, a former police detective with a reputation for being relentless. I also consulted with a forensic accountant, a woman who specialized in uncovering financial fraud. Together, we began to piece together the puzzle of Mark S. deception. The more we uncovered, the more my heart broke, not just for myself, but for all the people he had betrayed. Our friend, Sarah, who had invested her inheritance, the money her parents had worked their whole lives for. The elderly couple down the street who had trusted him with their retirement fund. He had preyed on their trust, their friendship, their vulnerability. I realized that the man I had married didn't exist. He was a phantom, a carefully crafted persona designed to lure people in and take everything from them. And I had been his greatest creation, the loving wife, the perfect partner, the ultimate alibi. The rage I felt was a living, breathing thing inside me. It was a fire that threatened to consume me, but I couldn't let it. I had to channel it. I had to turn my pain into a weapon. Mark had destroyed my world. Now, I was going to destroy his, and I was going to do it with the one thing he had never counted on: the truth. The full, unvarnished, devastating truth. He thought he was the master of the game, but he had no idea that I was about to change all the rules. There's a moment, after the initial shock of betrayal, when the tears dry up and a cold clarity sets in. For me, that moment was the turning point. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the architect of his downfall, and my blueprint was revenge. But this wasn't going to be a simple, emotional outburst. This was going to be a calculated, systematic dismantling of the life he had so carefully constructed. Yes, I have the account numbers, the offshore transfers, the shell corporations, everything. We need to move quickly, before he gets suspicious. My first step was to secure my own future. With the help of the forensic accountant, I quietly began to move my own assets, everything that was legally mine, into new, secure accounts that he couldn't touch. I had to protect myself. I had to ensure that when his house of cards came crashing down, I wouldn't be buried in the rubble. Next, I focused on his victims, the friends, the family, the innocent people he had swindled. I couldn't just go to them and tell them the truth. Not yet. Mark was a master manipulator. He would twist the story, paint me as a bitter, vengeful wife. I needed irrefutable proof, the gambling addiction. It was another layer of his deceit, another secret life he had been leading. He wasn't just a cheat and a con artist. He was a desperate man, trying to stay one step ahead of the consequences of his own actions. The plan began to take shape. It had to be a multi-pronged attack. I would expose his affair, his financial fraud, and his gambling debts, all at once. And I would do it in the most public, most humiliating way possible. He had built his reputation on a foundation of lies. I was going to demolish it with the truth. The centerpiece of my plan was Mark S.'s upcoming Man of the Year award. He was being honored by the local business association for his contributions to the community. The irony was almost too much to bear. It was the perfect stage for his public execution. I started by anonymously tipping off the financial regulatory authorities. I sent them a detailed package of evidence, everything the forensic accountant had compiled. Then I contacted the people he owed money to, the loan sharks his gambling addiction had led him to. I gave them the date and time of the award ceremony. I told them Mark would be there, and that he was about to come into a lot of money. A lie, of course, but a fitting one, given the circumstances. Was it cruel? Yes. Did I have moments of doubt? Of course. I was about to destroy the man I had once loved, but then I would think of the faces of his victims. I would think of the years of my life I had wasted, living in a lie, and the doubt would vanish, replaced by a steely resolve. He had shown me no mercy. I would show him none. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice. And I was about to become its swift and terrible instrument. The days leading up to the award ceremony were the longest of my life. I was living with a man who had no idea his world was about to be obliterated. I had to maintain the facade, to play the part of the proud, supportive wife. It was the most difficult acting I have ever had to do. Of course, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. Looking at him, so confident, so oblivious, a part of me felt a strange sense of pity. He was a child playing with a loaded gun, and he had no idea it was about to go off in his face. But then I would remember the pain he had caused, the lives he had ruined, and the pity would evaporate like mist in the morning sun. As we walked into the ballroom, I felt a surge of adrenaline. Everyone was there. Our friends, our family, Mark's colleagues, and his victims. All of them smiling, congratulating him, completely unaware of the bombshell that was about to drop. I also saw a few unfamiliar faces in the crowd, menacing figures lurking in the shadows. The loan sharks had taken the bait. Everything was in place. The private investigator had replaced the Business Association S presentation with the one I had created. The anonymous tip to the financial regulators had been made. The loan sharks were in position. All that was left was for the show to begin. As he stood there, basking in the adulation of the crowd, spouting his well-rehearsed lies, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was it. The final act of our tragic play. He had written the script, but I was about to give it a shocking and very public new ending. The storm was about to break, and he was standing right in the eye of it. And I was the one who was about to unleash the tempest. And then it began. The first image to appear on the screen was not of Mark closing a business deal. It was a photo of him and Isabella kissing on a beach in the Maldives. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Mark's face went pale. He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. I just stood there, my expression unreadable. The room was silent, save for the sound of my voice, which I had recorded as a narration for the video. On video narration. For years, Mark has been living a double life. A life of deceit, funded by the very people who trusted him the most. I could hear murmurs of shock and outrage from the audience. Our friends, our neighbors, their faces were a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. I saw my own parents, their expressions of pride turning to ones of utter devastation. And then, all at once, the room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, crying. Mark stood on the stage, frozen, a deer in the headlights. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world crumble to dust. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. Why? I just held his gaze, and for the first time in a long time, he saw the real me, not the naive, trusting wife he had married, but the woman he had created. A woman forged in the fires of his betrayal, and now, the architect of his destruction. He had built his kingdom on lies, and with one final, devastating truth, I had burned it to the ground. In the days and weeks that followed, the story was everywhere. The news, the papers, the gossip blogs, the fall of the man of the year. They painted me as the scorned wife who had exacted her revenge. Some called me a hero, others, a villain. I didn't care. I had done what I had to do. My parents were devastated by the financial loss, but they were more concerned about me. They had trusted Mark too. They had welcomed him into our family. His betrayal had cut them deep, but they stood by me, my unwavering pillars of support in the ensuing storm. The legal battle was long and arduous, but with the mountain of evidence I had collected, the outcome was never really in doubt. Mark was sentenced to a long prison term. The offshore accounts were frozen, and the process of recovering the stolen money began. It wouldn't be enough to make everyone whole, but it was a start. It was a measure of justice. As for Isabella, she disappeared from the public eye. I heard she moved to another city, changed her name. She was just another casualty of Mark's web of lies, a pawn in his twisted game. I couldn't have found it in myself to hate her. She was just another woman who had fallen for the charming phantom he had created. The question I get asked the most is, was it worth it? And the truth is, revenge is not as sweet as the stories make it out to be. There was no triumphant feeling of victory. Just a profound sense of emptiness. I had dedicated so much of my time and energy to his destruction that when it was finally over, I was left with a void. I had to learn to live with the silence. The silence that was once filled with his laughter, his promises, his lies. I had to rediscover who I was without him. The woman I was before I became Mrs. Mark Thompson. The woman I had lost sight of in the blinding glare of our perfect life. But in that emptiness, I found something unexpected. I found freedom. The freedom from the constant anxiety of his lies. The freedom from the weight of his deception. The freedom to be myself, to trust my own instincts, to build a life on my own terms. The fire of my revenge had burned everything to the ground, but from the ashes, something new was beginning to grow. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. It has been a few years now. The dust has settled, the wounds have begun to heal, but the scars remain. They are a part of me now, a permanent reminder of the life I once lived, and the woman I have become. I started writing at first as a form of therapy, a way to make sense of the chaos, to put the pieces of my shattered life back together in a way that I could understand. But then, it became something more. It became a story I realized I needed to share. Betrayal is a universal language. It is a pain that transcends age, gender, and culture. And in sharing my story, I found a community of people who had been through their own private hells. People who had been lied to, cheated on, and deceived. And in their stories, I found a reflection of my own. I realized I wasn't alone. The most important lesson I learned from all of this is the power of trusting your own intuition. That little voice inside you that whispers, something isn't right. For so long, I had silenced that voice. I had chosen to believe the beautiful lie because the truth was too painful to confront. But the truth, no matter how ugly, will always set you free. My revenge was not about hatred. It was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about taking back the power that had been stolen from me. It was about ensuring that he could never hurt anyone again. And in the end, it was about finding my way back to myself. My story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who are capable of the greatest deception. But it's also a story of survival, a story of hope. It's a story that proves that even after the most devastating betrayal, you can rebuild your life. You can find your strength. You can heal. And you can emerge from the ashes, not broken, but stronger than ever before. My name is Anna, and this is my truth. If you are moved by this story and want to hear more tales of deception and retribution, make sure you subscribe to Deception Diaries and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the secrets we unravel next. Until then, trust your instincts and never underestimate the power of the truth.